Welcome to Something Spooky's Halloween. My name is Terry Pearson, and today I'm going to be reading stories from my new book, No More Days. This is a collection of short, scary stories that is now available on Amazon. Each story is exactly 1,000 words long, and there are 20 of them. You can find No More Days on Amazon now. Please check it out. I'm going to be reading The Flea Market Sabbath. There were tables of junk and treasure from one side of the room to the other. An oasis of artifacts, furniture, baseball cards, clothes, toys, jewelry, bottles, clocks, Beanie Babies, sports equipment, movies, handmade crafts, license plates, and an endless confetti of ceramic statues and seasonal decorations. In the back, there were a row of food vendors, popcorn, pretzels, corn dogs, and a fancy pop-up cart that had funnel cake and lemonade. A shadow-stained outline marked the spot where there had once been a self-serve cotton candy machine. Billy Haynes wandered through the maze of a market with his hand in his mother's. He was a little old for that sort of thing at 10, but the crowds were thick, and he all too well remembered the time that he was lost and found his way into a dark booth in the back. It was the size of a few booths, actually, the whole far corner of the room. Tented and curtained drapes and stretched fabric walls formed a little hut over the space of a few tables. A sign outside said, "Palm readings and crystal ball fortunes." Billy wasn't interested in either one and didn't have any money if he had been. He just stopped to notice the way the surrounding sound was stifled out, choked to nothing in the deep recess of shadows inside. While he stared, he felt himself drifting slowly, subconsciously into the mouth of the tent. The air seemed cooler and his vision tunneled into the thick darkness. Then, as a buzz began to hum in his ears, he felt a strong hand grasp his arm and pull him out. The man was inconceivably large to Billy. His huge, scarred hand wrapped around Billy's bicep like a snake on a branch. He was so tall, Billy could hardly see his face, obscured by height, the angle, and the overhead lights that had haloed his head. "Little boys should not be here." The man's voice was as gravelly as his appearance. Billy didn't need to be told twice and ran screaming all through the flea market. His mom had to pick him up from the staff offices after he ended up there in hysterical haze he could hardly remember. He sobbed as she told him it was time to leave and that they couldn't stop for the Jurassic Park toy on the way out. Later, when he had calmed down, Billy was able to better explain to his mom what had happened. His animated description of the old witch's cave only furthered his mother's suspicion that he was making too much of the whole thing. She told him that the man was right, he had no business there, and that the man was probably just trying to scare him so that he wouldn't come back. If that had been the plan, it was wildly successful, seeing as how Billy went to great lengths to make sure he didn't have to return to the flea market for a long time afterward. He came up with whatever he could, staying at a friend's house, a day trip to see his grandparents, a fake cold, on the third weekend, month after month, when he knew his mom went to the market. He even thought of joining the soccer team, but so detested the idea that this month he finally found himself back in the dusty labyrinth. Today, Billy gripped his mother's hand so hard that she had to pull it loose and shake it free. He could see the red marks outlining where his finger had been. As soon as they entered the large central room, he was peering over the tables and through traffic to see if he could glimpse the tent in the back. He couldn't see through the trove of farmhouse antiques and baseball bobbleheads and started to feel a rising dread, a swell of anxiety as they passed up and down the aisles, closer and closer to the back corner of the room. When they entered the final row, the air seemed colder and Billy felt a pressure in his head. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but as they pressed on, passing by effigies of forgotten advertising mascots and clouded glass soda bottles with worn labels, Billy's vision began to flicker. It seemed like everything around him was fading out, gently extinguishing into darkness. Billy turned to his mom and opened his mouth, but she was already gone too. There was nothing around him. He had sunk into a void, passed through some invisible door to an empty space. He turned and ran back the way he had come, but the silent shadow stretched out forever in front of him. He tried to call out, but couldn't even hear himself, muffled by the blank nothingness. Then he heard a noise behind him, painful creaks that sounded like rusty bones snapping into place, and a rattle like a snake. Billy looked back and saw the outline of a little old woman, hunched over and draped in ragged cloth. A shawl over her head obscured her face, but as Billy watched, a small flame grew in her cupped hand and illuminated her features. Her skin seemed to be melting off of her, running and dripping like wet paint. Sharp cheekbones seemed ready to poke through the muddy mess, and a wide grin revealed crooked and jagged teeth that made Billy picture the rows of tombstones in his local cemetery. He tried to scream but didn't make a sound, and then he heard her laugh, a mean, gurgling sound that echoed all around him. She was getting closer, but neither of them were moving. The blank space seemed to be pulling them together. Little boys should not be here. The voice was hers, but not human. Billy stood outside the tent, staring into its darkness, tears running down his face and his mouth hanging open. His mother pleaded with him to say something. That was the Flea Market Sabbath from No More Days. I hope you will check it out on Amazon. Thank you so much.